right, so let's go ahead and get started. Today's format is we're going to switch things up a little bit, and today's topic, everyone needs to belong. We're talking about the need for loneliness, or not the need for loneliness, the need for connection to combat loneliness and isolation. You may or may not be aware that in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report about the loneliness epidemic and declaring it a public health crisis. It's an 81-page report, which is full of information. A lot of it is pretty startling, so I would encourage you to check that out. But for the sake of making sure that we're all on the same page, we thought that it would be kind of a nice way to switch things up. We're going to start off with a little bit of a presentation. So whether you asked for it or not, you're all in Corey's class today. So I promise this won't be too long, and then we will get started with our panel discussion after that. But we thought it might be beneficial that we all start off with a baseline level of information, just to be aware of the issue at hand and what it is that we're talking about. Okay, I could have done that earlier, but so as I said, today's topic, everyone needs to belong. We are talking about the loneliness epidemic. So to make sure that we all kind of understand what loneliness is, this is a definition that was provided by the Surgeon General. Loneliness is defined as a subjective, distressing experience that results from perceived isolation or inadequate meaningful connections, where inadequate refers to the discrepancy or unmet need between an individual's preferred and actual experience. So I think there are a few important things here. This is a state of perception. A lot of times we confuse loneliness with being alone, and those are two very different things. People who are surrounded by people all the time can experience feelings of intense loneliness, and some people who rarely ever see another person might not be lonely. So this is a perception about the quality of the connections that we have in our social circle and our family unit, in the contacts that we make throughout the day. There's some shocking statistics relating to loneliness. More than half of adults in the US are living with measurable levels of loneliness. This is according to the report from the US Surgeon General. More than half. One study found that 72% of women and 60% of men reported feeling lonely at times. I think that there's a misconception that men are often more lonely than women, but several studies show that that's not really the case. It's fairly close, but in general, women report feeling lonely more than men. I will also say, when you look at some of these studies, these numbers vary because since this is a subjective condition, it changes depending on the time, the type of study that's used, the place. So there are a lot of factors that play into this. So please just keep in mind that these percentages are generalizations for the most part, because while this may be directly from a very credible study, it does change because there are subjective factors, and not everyone experiences chronic loneliness every day. Some people might experience once a week. Some people might only experience occasional loneliness. So just bear that in mind. I think the difference, though, that plays into that perception that men are more lonely than women has to do with how men deal with their emotional state. The same study found that 38% of men reported that they would talk to someone if they were feeling lonely, compared to 56% of women who said that they would reach out to someone. That's a huge difference. And when we think about the rates of suicide among men, the rates of other health conditions among men, we start to see some connections here. There are a lot of theories about why this might be. Social scientists have looked into studying how men relate to their emotions, how men process their emotions. And so there are some great some great people out there that if you're interested, I would recommend picking up some of their books. Psychotherapist Robert Garfield is someone who is a good name to look into. He coined the term emotional intimacy deficiency, which relates to the way that culturally males are subjected to much less emotional interaction early in life. If you may have heard of something called the blue blanket study, it found that babies wrapped in blue blankets were touched considerably less than babies wrapped in pink blankets. So there are underlying social causes that might lead to some of this. Naomi Way is another person that I would suggest checking out, reading, if you're interested in this topic. So Dr. Jeremy Noble, who's the author of Project Unlonely, Healing Our Crisis of Disconnection, said loneliness is experienced throughout a person's lifespan, and it can spiral as a result of trauma, illness, and the effects of aging. It can also be exacerbated by technology taking the place of human interaction, which helps explain why young people report the highest rates of loneliness. That's another misconception. We tend to think that loneliness increases as we age. However, loneliness generally decreases as we age. So in polls, not just in the United States, but worldwide, there was a really famous poll on loneliness done in the UK. There are worldwide statistics to show that globally, the trend remains the same. But in the United States, those that are in the younger age range, 18 to 24, or even a little bit younger, 15 to 24, they were found to have, over the years, their social interaction, their social connection has decreased by 70%. And in terms of who is reporting the highest levels of loneliness, it is that young adult age range. So this graph that I've got up here, I wanted to put it up because it shows the trend. So on the y-axis, that is the mean score on the UCLA loneliness scale. So if you're not familiar with that, there's a standard evaluation that's used to determine how lonely someone is. You can check it out. I've taken it myself. It's very kind of eye-opening to look at. So you can see, now this might look kind of like a flat line depending on where you're sitting, but it's highest younger in age. So the scale starts at 20 and ends at 70. And the reason that it ended at 70 is just because they didn't have enough measurable data beyond that age range to really include it. So they cut the graph off at 70. This is from the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, if anyone's interested in finding this. But you can see it starts high, declines a little bit in the 30s, and then there is a slight peak in the 40s. And researchers are not quite sure yet why that peaks in the 40s and then continues to decline. Now, that's not to say that the percentages of loneliness experienced by people who are 70 and over are insignificant, because it is still quite significant. If you see here on the right, it says, contrary to popular belief, several studies, including ours, this is coming from a study that was done by researchers at Harvard University. Several studies, including ours, suggest that young people are far more likely to be lonely than the general population of adults, and that loneliness subsides as people move through middle age. 61% of young adults in our survey reported feeling serious loneliness in the prior month, compared to 24% of survey respondents aged 55 to 65. So 24% of people experiencing serious loneliness is still a high number, 1 out of every 4 people. But it's alarming that 61% of young adults are reporting that. When we look at the health impacts, and again, this is directly from the report from the Surgeon General. This is the mortality comparison odds of loneliness to some of the other most likely causes of death. So you can see, you've probably heard kind of the comparison that loneliness is similar to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And what they mean is that the impacts of loneliness on not just our mental health, but our physical health are relative to the decrease in our lifespan that smoking causes. You can see drinking 6 alcoholic drinks daily, physical inactivity, obesity, and air pollution don't quite meet the average loss of lifespan for those who experience chronic loneliness. Now, there's a lot of reasons about why this is. It comes down to how coping mechanisms that people utilize can be a reason. The effect on individuals' mental health, but there are also very real, tangible physical side effects as well, such as 50% increased risk of dementia, 29% increased risk of heart attack. Some really shocking statistics that are physical effects of loneliness. So trying to understand why this is an issue, why was this declared a public health crisis in 2023? When we start to look at some of the decline of how we had traditionally connected with people over the last 20 or so years, from 2003 to 2020, the time that each individual spent alone on average increased while social engagement decreased. If we look at these statistics, social isolation increased by an average of 24 hours per month. So a whole day a month extra where on average, the average person is alone. Household family social engagement decreased by 5 hours per month on average. Companionship, which refers to shared leisure for the sake of employment, decreased by 14 hours per month. Social engagement with friends decreased by an average of 20 hours per month. Non-household family social engagement dropped by 6.5 hours per month. And social engagement with others decreased by an average of 10 hours per month. So we can see from this, generally we're spending less time with each other in person. This might prompt a lot of us to reach out online to online communities, and there can certainly be some benefit there. However, when people report how different coping mechanisms make them feel connected, social media really doesn't really rank. So it doesn't really fill the gap. It doesn't provide the same benefit as in-person social connection. According to the American Psychiatric Association, Americans report utilizing the following coping mechanisms when feeling lonely. The top coping mechanism that people reported, 50% of people said that they find a distraction such as TV, podcasts, or social media. That's not helping us find social connection. 41% go for a walk. 38% reach out to friends or family. So we would like to see that be the top one. 31% connect to a pet, 31% exercise, 26% eat more than usual, 13% use drugs or alcohol, only 9% reported that they connect to a therapist or counselor, and 6% volunteer. Selecting among several options, Americans ranked the top 3 areas where they felt the highest sense of community and belonging as their family, which is 65%. So we feel most connected to our family in general, if we have family to connect to. Among their friends, which was 53% of a sense of community and belonging. And 20% of people reported feeling that sense in their neighborhoods. So online communities and discussion forums were among the least likely to be selected. Only 3%. 3% of people said that they felt socially connected and a sense of community belonging on online forums. Along with sports and recreational teams, 4%, and the gym or fitness classes, 5%. Responses to many options hovered toward the middle, with social media selected by only 16% of individuals as a place where they feel a high sense of belonging and social connection, and 17% listing work as such. So I think that this is interesting because think about the types of things that we suggest to people. If we know that someone is dealing with loneliness, or even if someone, it's fairly common if someone seems depressed or down or sad for some reason, we might say, oh, why don't you play sports? Why don't you find a group on Facebook? Why don't you, connect with your coworkers? But these aren't sources of solid social connection for people. The highest percentages, as we can see, are family and friends. And so it really is rooted in those in-person social networks. Now, if you are a person who doesn't have a family that's either close or present or accepting or living, that certainly complicates things and makes that difficult for people. Aside from differences in age, people who come from marginalized communities, so whether they are people of color, whether they are members of the LGBTQ community, Specifically, people who are immigrants to the country report, in terms of demographic populations, report the highest levels of feeling disconnected and feeling lonely. And it makes sense when you look at where do people find the most social connection. So the Surgeon General devised 6 pillars to advance social connection. And I know these are probably too small for you to read, but they are: strengthen social infrastructure in local communities, which includes designing the built environment to promote social connection, establishing and scaling community connection programs, and investing in local institutions that bring people together. The second one, enacting pro-connection public policies. And I can provide this to you later or tell you where it is. So just for the sake of time, I'm not going to read every single one of these. Mobilizing the health sector, reforming digital environments, deepening our knowledge, and building a culture of connection. So it's clear from this statement that the Surgeon General is saying this isn't just an individual problem. This isn't just a community problem. This is a global problem. This needs to happen on a scale from the government all the way down to you and me, the individual. We have shifted into a culture where we don't connect with people, and it's not by any intentional fault of anyone. And there were certainly complicators along the way that led to that. We saw a spike in people reporting to be lonely during COVID, when you would expect to be isolated. But those numbers, while they have come down, they're still much higher than they were before COVID. And I think that especially supercharged our disconnection in person. Think how many meetings now, most of you I see regularly on Zoom. Some of you I meet for the first time in the community. I've never actually seen you in person. It's only via Zoom. So think how much even just that has shifted in our life. All right, so if you guys are done in Corey's classroom for today, that was brief, and oh, thank you. That was brief, and you're lucky because I have a whole folder here of things that I was like, oh, I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about this. This is a topic that I am personally very passionate about, and I have been reading about and learning about for the last 5 or 6 years. You know, certainly because of the impact that it's had on my own life and the lives of other people that I know, and based on the statistics, the lives of at least half of you in this room. So I'm really excited for today's discussion. I think it's very important and it's going to be very impactful. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists that are here with us today. We have Jack Wheeler, who is the Director of Student Wellness at Denison University. We have Colleen Hendon, Executive Director at Mental Health America of Licking County. And we have Shae Bailey, who is a linkage coordinator for Newark City Schools. Let's give them a welcome. All right. So should be a microphone somewhere if you want to go ahead and pick that up. We can start with whoever wants to start. It might be on mute, so you might have to hit that button just to get it. Turn the light green. All right, perfect. Okay, so our panelists have been provided with some questions that were written ahead of time. If you have questions during their discussion that you would like to ask, please find those long strips of paper in the middle of your table. You may write your questions on there. Before the end of today, we will come around and collect them so that we can ask those questions to the panelists. We will try our best to address them. Sometimes we don't get to all of them based on time, but if you do have questions, please feel free to write those on there. So for our panelists, I'm going to ask questions. If there's one that you would prefer to pass, please feel free to do so. If it's not something that you feel comfortable answering or aren't knowledgeable about, that's totally okay. But to the best of your ability, please answer the questions based on your own professional experience or your personal experience, if you feel comfortable sharing that, and related to the group of individuals that you serve. So Colleen has the microphone, so we'll start there with her. So Colleen, just to kind of, I know most people here probably know you, but just to kind of give an introduction, could you just tell us what inspired you to get involved in working in your current field?
Sure, awesome. Good morning, everybody. What really inspired me to get involved in the work that I do, which is public health, health education, and of course all surrounded around mental health. What really inspired me is my own lived experience with mental illness, as well as my daily share my own lived experience with mental illness, with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. I think is really important in terms of helping to eradicate some of the stigma surrounding mental illness and addiction. And so I'm very grateful and blessed to be able to be in this role where our sole mission, or our biggest mission, is to eradicate the stigma surrounding mental health. So very, very much. Thank you.
I have had kind of a different journey, I guess, because I didn't originally want to work in a school. I wanted to do counseling, and then I discovered that I didn't really want to do that. So, but before I feel like a lot of people think, oh, is that a student? Because I work at a school, and a lot of the students think that I'm a student, because I look young. But, so I'm like starting my career, but I am also interested in mental health, and I always felt like I wanted to do something in mental health, and I feel like now I get to do something with helping students and even helping, you know, a wide range of people with finding resources and different things like that. So I feel like I didn't stray too far away from counseling, but I just always felt like that was something I wanted to do with helping people. My parents were involved. They worked for the county, so I always grew up knowing that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I got my start.
Good morning. Again, my name is Jack Wheeler. My interest, I started off similarly wanting to help people, and that drew me to psychology. But then when I was in school, I met a social work professor, and she showed me the values that really aligned with what I was seeking, which is an act of service, the importance of human relationships, looking at the full environment, so that I wasn't just working with individuals, but I was able to work with the systems that are impacting those individuals as well. So that, of course, led to mental health counseling. I worked in school setting systems across Columbus, doing adventure therapy as well, so taking young people into new environments, helping them learn about themselves in those natural green environments. And then also working in higher education and school settings where you can, it's a very fortunate place where you can work with individuals, but then also work with the entire system that they're living within a residential university setting. So, yeah, I now identify not just as a social worker, but as an environmental social worker, looking at all the impacts having influence on that person.
All right, thank you so much for sharing those introductions. It's good to know what led you to where you are, so I appreciate that. So the first real question here, and I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but what are some common misconceptions that people have about loneliness, especially in relation to the individuals that you work with every day? And Jack, if you want to start and pass the microphone.
Perfect. Also, Corey, great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And I just want to second the resource Corey was referencing from the Health and Human Services, the Surgeon General. It's open access online. If you look it up, great content. I know 82 pages seems like a lot, but it's a quick.
Actually, I read through it entirely and I was like, oh, I didn't expect it to be the end.
Yeah, it's like formatted really well, so it helps you go through it.
Yeah, real page turner.
Say researchers, right? So common misconception, you hit on it. When people hear loneliness, they immediately go to lonely, which is more social isolation. But it is that sense of, and I will say, the variable when we're studying it is really difficult to track. And you hit on this as well, just because it's so context specific. When you ask someone, are you lonely? Do you belong? They're thinking, okay, does he mean the community? Does he mean the university? Does he mean with my friend group? They aren't quite sure. And depending on where they're thinking about it in context, that answer will shift quite a bit. So I had a little bit more consistent data when tracking flourishing. which are more the resilience factors around loneliness and connection. But yeah, so that's just one thing, especially around belonging. That's the one that's a very hot variable right now. Everyone wants to know about belonging. And I can ask the same person one day to the next and get completely different answers.
So I think, and Corey, again, great presentation. And also, I think, just kind of reiterating one of the points that you had brought up, one of the misconceptions, I think, is just this piece of, while we have social media and different ways for us to be connected, it's still different loneliness and being alone, right? So even though we have increase in technology, we still have these missed opportunities to be able to really be able to connect in person. And I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions is just the difference between those two words, you know, and how they can be completely different. And in terms of just kind of the individuals that I work with on a day-to-day, or you know, just thinking about at MHA's Yes Club, where we have teens anywhere from 11 to 17, and I know that social media is a big part of a lot of the youth's kind of everyday life. But we're still seeing, we do a survey with our Yes Club members at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, kind of seeing where they're at, kind of socially, emotionally, mentally. And even though, again, we have this increase in social media, we're still seeing, even amongst our Yes Club members, that kind of increase in loneliness, or some of those kind of negative side effects that we might see from loneliness, whether it's depression, having some of those physical kind of issues that that Corey had highlighted. I think that's another really big misconception, is just how loneliness can really impact our physical health. So I think those are just kind of two big pieces.
I don't really have a lot to add, but I'm noticing with like working with high school students and teenagers, I feel like the whole idea with social media is we, you know, think, oh, you know, they have all these friends, or even if they're connected with sports teams or activities, that doesn't necessarily mean they feel like they belong. So that's probably another misconception, especially the thing that you said about the sports. Although that is something that they push a lot with school, because I think because family and friends are so important for feeling belonging, when you get involved in things, those help you to build friendships with people. So, and I think that's a question for later too, if I will not.
All right, thank you so much for those answers. The next question, I'm going to reframe a little bit. So sorry to switch up the questions a little bit. So originally we had asked, why is there an increased concern for loneliness and belonging? And we can still certainly talk more about that. I briefly touched on it, but I also am interested locally. What are the things that locally contribute to things that we're seeing? You know, each community has their own specific challenges, specific based even just down to how the city is planned out, that might prevent people from socially connecting. So if you feel confident to answer that question, what are the local things that are increasing our concern for loneliness and belonging? Or you can elaborate on a wider scale.
Okay, there's a chance to think here for a second. So most of the students that I work with and my practice, the Granville Counseling Coalition, is in Granville. And so we're seeing that there is a need to perform. There's a high expectation of performance. They're graded and tracked quantitatively from 3rd grade on, as athletes, as academics, and it's really hard for them even to show up in a space and just be seen as them, right? Like just that humanistic, I see you, I care about you, I don't need anything from you. It's almost a transactional space that they show up in. And we see this also in social media. They need to perform in those spaces. It's not necessarily their true authentic self that they're showing up. And so we need to create spaces and be leaders in saying, how are you really? Like, just want to hear, and I don't, I feel like there's fewer locally. And again, that's more in a very academic, high performance space. Right.
So I think, and thank you, Corey, for that question. I really appreciate you kind of focusing that on local. I think one of our biggest challenges too in Licking County is we're quite a large county. So even in terms of going to spaces, if there's groups, if there's support groups or places where folks are meeting with groups of folks, how far of the drive is that? Do folks have access to transportation? Licking County is, of course, doing great things with its transportation, but still, of course, going to be a barrier for a lot of folks. So I think that's one of our biggest challenges in our community. I also think that in terms of just kind of a concern, kind of locally as well as it relates to loneliness, is also the increase in suicide rates. Of course, one of the biggest pieces for being concerned about folks feeling lonely, depressed, is if folks are having those thoughts about suicide. At MHA, I lead our loss team, our local outreach to suicide survivors team, and I have led the team for about a year and a half. Just the number of calls that we have been able to, and the increase in suicide rates amongst Licking Countyans is really scary, and we definitely need to do something about that. And so just something I wanted to just make sure to touch on, and I'm sure I'll mention it throughout the day today, but just that really important conversation that we also need to have with folks if we are concerned about their mental health, if folks are thinking about suicide, that isolation, that loneliness can be a really big risk factor.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you for kind of pivoting a little bit on that question and giving us some local insight. In your work, we touched on some of the physical aspects of loneliness. Can you talk about some of the ways that you really see that in real life show up in the people that you work with?
I haven't met a lot like individually with students, but I have noticed that I feel like, and I don't know if this counts as a physical, just because like you see more of the mental health issues coming up, and I do feel like youth students, children are more willing to talk about things a little bit more, maybe more so than adults do, probably because we talk about it a lot. I do know, and I don't know if everyone's familiar with this, but in the schools, there are requirements through the state of Ohio now that we do social emotional classes, and those are required throughout the entire, so like all grades have to have some kind of social emotional learning. It looks a little bit different as they get older, but that is one of the requirements. So students and kids, I think, are a little bit more comfortable talking about those things, especially since we're giving them words and, vocabulary so that they know how do I explain myself. So I feel like they talk about it a little bit more. I feel like I'm straying away from this question, but I feel like the ones that I've seen, they're able to say, this is what's going on, or this is how I feel, or these are the things that I'm dealing with. And I feel like we've been able to give them some kind of a language. So they might say, oh, this is a physical thing, like my neck hurts. And so then, then you can kind of say, oh, maybe that's something that's not just a physical issue, maybe there's something else going on.
Sure, thank you. And in fact, just to kind of, build off of what you said, so earlier I referenced, social psychologist Niobe Way, who noted that, among adolescent boys, when they reach the age where they stopped sharing their feelings, because younger children are more likely to talk about how they're feeling, they are more likely to be open about their emotions. But when boys reach that age where they stop sharing that, the rates of suicide and depression increase alarmingly at that age. So you are 100% correct in saying that, like, the younger you are, the more likely you are to speak up. And so encouraging people to give them that language is important. So thank you for the work that you're doing on that.
But similarly, I work with younger adults most of the time, and I think the study is, it has a coming from trauma-informed care lens that's from prolonged chronic exposures to loneliness. And so younger adults, they might not necessarily feel the heart disease or the stroke probabilities going up. Like that's more the ACEs studies, Folletti, whatnot. But what we do see quite a bit are how that that isolation loneliness is impacting the mental health, which then leads to negative physical behaviors and habits. I think of a lot of young people who are struggling with the relationship around food, and so how we'll see more an increase in eating disorders, which have a huge impact early on to physical health. But again, over time, as you're feeling more and more lonely, that's where you see the inflammation and the increased health issues coming up. But in addition, not just disordered eating, but turning to substance use, which has a huge impact on health, as well as the suicide, increase in suicidal ideation.
All right. So what strategies exist for folks to successfully foster a sense of belonging in order to address loneliness in their own lives? What might you recommend, whether it's something specific or more of just a strategy that you might suggest to someone?
This is like a little story. So when I, at Newark High School, they do these like visit days for the 8th graders. And they have, since there's 3 different middle schools, they have 3 different days. And I got to sit in with the high school students who were mentors, doing like a student panel, and they answered some questions. And one of the things that I really noticed was those students were really encouraging the 8th graders to get involved with different activities. And while, you know, you can experience lots of loneliness being around people, I think, like I said earlier, when you are building connections with other students or other people who have similar interests to you, you can start to feel like your genuine self, and you start to feel like there are other people who are like you. And something that I've noticed in the high school is there's a lot of students who aren't involved in anything. And I think once they're not involved in anything, they just start to not care about a lot of stuff. So they sit in school suspension all day, and they have grades that are not really great, and they just don't care. And I think the difference between those students who are really successful and the students who are struggling is that they have a social circle of people who are similar to them and that have similar interests. And not only is it like, oh, we have similar interests, it's something that it's a hobby. So it like becomes something, it becomes part of your identity. It becomes something that you can go to have a positive coping skill. But when the students don't have those opportunities to, so some of the students, like, they have to go to work, so they don't always have the ability to do that. Or one of my roles is sitting with the students in school suspension and asking them, like, is there anything I can help you with? And a lot of the students that are in there because they skipped their after-school detention because they had to go home, because they had to go to work, or they had to take care of their siblings. So there's like like I think you said earlier, missed opportunities. Like there's all these opportunities, but then sometimes there are these greater things that limit kids from being able to partake in those opportunities. So, but I do think that being able to be involved in things really helps them. Because I've just noticed that with a lot of students just that I talk to on a regular basis.
I think you really hit the nail on the head. Really trying to find a group of folks or a community of people where you feel as though you belong. I think that is one of the most helpful strategies, but it can be difficult to maybe find who those people are. And so maybe it's navigating, the different resources available in the community, kind of doing your own kind of self-check and what do I like to do? Do I like to be active? Maybe it's getting involved in, like soccer or some kind of sport, some sort of maybe a bowling league. Something where we're building some connection with folks where we have some sort of similarity with folks. And when we talk about identity, that can really encompass every part of our beings. And so we talk about culture and belonging. It can also include where we come from, as well as maybe our spirituality or lack thereof, however we feel connected with other folks.
My 50 springs turning on here, so if we could help foster that sense of belonging. Okay, on the level, we need to look at the built environment, the connecting the spaces around here, so that we're creating an infrastructure, and this comes so that helps foster that, so that it doesn't just fall on the individual, but have to rise up within an infrastructure that's really keeping them from being. So that's, I think, getting to the next question. Going to the individual level as well. I have the privilege of sitting with people in an individual space and asking these questions of, yes, who cares about you? Because there's usually someone that they're not thinking about. And so getting them to externalize and recognize, yes, there is someone from my past or at home or at school that I can connect with and care for. But also more broadly, looking at, there might be variables more than just human connection too. What is your purpose? What's your why? What's your mission? Some people, they find connection belonging through their faith. That's not necessarily a person. It's connection. It might be through nature. They go and they connect with the earth or the animals outside, or they might connect with a sense of accomplishment in their work. I'm able to contribute this to my wider community. And so helping just identify those things and amplifying it, because I guarantee you there's things that they're holding on to, but just not seeing it really from them.
Great, thank you. And you did allude to this next question, so let's elaborate. What types of policies, if any, if you have suggestions, should institutions, governments, whomever adopt to combat loneliness?
Since I alluded to it, right? It's clearly in from my brain there. I think it is a cross-sector responsibility. So it does not belong just in the mental health field. This is the responsibility in our schools, in our governments, in our village and city planning. They should be thinking about how do we create opportunities for connection, because this is a societal issue. This is born out of all of these institutions collectively moving forward and ease and just placating, right? Like, oh, that's tough. Here's a video game, right? That's tough. Just go moves that aside, right? Versus that's tough, let's sit with it and be with each other and care for each other. Or here's transportation, here is access to preventative health care. Right now, our healthcare system is based on a medical model, which is intervention based. By the time they need help, that's when their insurance kicks in. How is our prevention and mental health America getting support, right? It's through grants and government institutions. But when all the money is, as a social worker, it makes so much more sense for me as a business plan to work with individuals after they're already in crisis. But for me to go and talk to an entire classroom, I get paid a fraction of what it would be to do the intervention, right? And so it's just, we need to be looking at those funding streams too as governments and say, it shouldn't just be about intervention medical model. We need to be funding the bigger preventative macro infrastructural changes as well.
Yeah, I think totally agree with that. Oh, no. I think that, also in terms of just kind of, policies, I think, again, just kind of, reiterating what Jack said, but, making sure that we are, funding opportunities that, do focus on prevention. Again, we kind of operate with that kind of medical model. And of course, the folks who are boots on the ground, kind of providing, you know, the education and the work, aren't necessarily paid at unfortunately, a livable wage, which can oftentimes be a huge challenge. And I think too, just in terms of HR policies within workplaces, making sure that things are in place in terms of having opportunities for folks to engage with one another. If an agency is maybe completely remote or maybe hybrid, maybe having some opportunities to kind of meet in person, and trying to limit maybe some of those more kind of Zoom kind of meetings, just to increase that that sense of belonging for folks.
I don't really have, I mean, those are really great things. This is just something that Newark does. So they have a prevention program. It's called Sources of Strength. It's done at the high school, and they're, I think, trying to get it to middle school too, but it's one of those things where it's like, you have to pay a lot of money for it. So, which thought was a great thought there, but, so Sources of Strength is like a suicide prevention program, but it's focused on sources of strength in your life so that the students, and really, I think whoever implements the program, the people who are involved in it, they look at the different strengths that they have and draw on those for suicide prevention. So that's another thing where it's like, you know, it would be important for any company, I guess, or any like institution to try to do more of those prevention things, and even having a greater understanding of mental health, or even doing more like education or professional development, I guess. I don't know if other fields have to do that. So like, then you would have to kind of understand more about just mental health in general, but I think that's what you do for your job, so.
Perfect. Thank you so much for those answers. If we think about, and again, we touched briefly on this, how different groups of people, especially those who come from marginalized communities, might experience higher rates of loneliness. But again, let's try to think locally too, and in your own professional experience. How do you see the impact of loneliness or a lack of belonging or social isolation vary across different cultures or societies? You know, example, people of color, LGBTQ individuals, by age, et cetera, depending on whatever populations you're working with.
this is just kind of back to what I said earlier, with some of the students, they can't get involved in things sometimes because of this, like, socioeconomic status. So you have a lot of students, I think especially in the Newark area, who are working so they can help provide for their families. It's not just like, oh, I have a part-time job and I'm gonna go blow my money however I want. Like, they're giving their money to their families. So you have socioeconomic status is kind of preventing students from getting involved in things. And I think one of the things that could be done in schools, which I think Newark tries to do this a little bit, is like having things that are during school, but then you kind of run into things where there's not a lot of time to do things like that. So I think that's just one thing that I've noticed with young kids. They're sometimes more focused on adult problems than just being a kid. So that's kind of that's going to impact loneliness and suicide, risk for suicide.
So I think also just thinking about here in particular, like in Colleen, just some of the spaces that we have, so the different meetings, different committees that we have, as well as folks that represent the mental health and healthcare system, really making sure that they represent the demographics of our community. I think is a huge, huge piece of that. And I think that, and for folks who maybe they are the only one leading their agency or their organization that represent their identity or their culture, that can oftentimes lead to trauma responses and just a whole host of issues that can contribute to loneliness and multiple other issues, of course, as well. So I think even thinking about the spaces that we all occupy and making sure that they are open and inclusive, and that we are fostering an inclusive environment. And part of that, it could be being aware of our language and the language that we use. It can be, just being aware of kind of our own culture and our own biases as well. Sometimes when we are in spaces and maybe we don't necessarily have that exposure to a certain culture or experience, we may actually cause more harm than good. So some of that implicit bias piece can feed into some of the loneliness piece, and racial trauma is a huge risk factor for suicide rates and other just mental health challenges. I think that's something that we really need to be aware of, especially as leaders at nonprofits and other local organizations, healthcare. We need to do a better job of being aware of our own biases, checking in on those biases, and then doing better to increase our knowledge so that we are, again, not causing more harm than good. For an individual who, again, maybe they're a person of color who's coming into a meeting space, is it safe and welcoming for folks? There are, different kinds of committees and again, kind of meetings that, I think in our community in particular needs to do a better job of creating a welcoming and inclusive space. And so again, just kind of checking in with ourselves, what are our own kind of biases? And something I just really wanted to make sure to kind of highlight too is the suicide rates, in particular amongst our Black youth, has increased significantly over the past 10 to 20 years. And can be, of course, related to loneliness and other risk factors, but I think that it's something that as a community, we need to be aware of and making sure that, again, that we're not causing more harm than good with kind of our work, whether we are providing counseling services to folks or even providing education in the community, just really making sure that we're checking in on these pieces.
Thank you, Colleen, mental health area for tracking that across our county too. A lot of the rates and differences between populations. I love data. I collect all the university's data. I work with the American College Health Association, looking at national trends in our data when it comes to loneliness, belonging, flourishing, all these variables. The populations that stand out the most, trans and gender non-conforming students, their health outcomes are, it's not looking good, folks. And there is so much rejection across society right now. They keep it in our public policies, in our schools. They are really struggling right now and have the highest rates of suicidality, isolation, lack of belonging, or flourishing. So I really want to raise up. We need to be doing a better job as a community and wrapping around supporting and showing care for trans and gender non-conforming youth, because it's also an increasing population. Another community, and you hit on it a little bit, we were talking about gender right now. They, while they will recognize they have good belonging and a lot of connections, they're lacking in a lot of flourishing, and they're the most likely to drop out for retention. They aren't reaching out for help as well. And so just how do we redefine what it means to be masculine in society, I think is really important. Because in my book, being vulnerable, being compassionate, showing that sense of nurturance, these are signs of a strong masculine role model. And we need to redefine what that looks like, because right now, current trends toward masculinity are in weird spots, so that they're either moving on to some very toxic masculine norms, or they're hearing just don't do that, but then we are role modeling what it means they can do to support one another and involve themselves. So I love being able to work.
Thank you so much for all of that insight. I think it's important, and on one sense it's good, but it's also startling just to know locally, you know, what exactly are we facing. So I appreciate that information. What role do our communities, our social networks, the individuals around us play in creating spaces intentionally that promote belonging and reduce isolation? And I think we can even frame this: what might we do as members of communities, members of social networks, and as individuals? What could we also do to promote belonging and reduce isolation?
I alluded to it in the previous question, but I really think that just from an individual kind of perspective, again, kind of checking in on our own biases, and making sure again that we are fostering spaces that create inclusive environments. And I think especially leaders at organizations, at different agencies certainly have a huge role in that, in setting the culture for the agency, for the team, and making sure that there's some policies and procedures that are also intact that also kind of highlight that as well. And I think part of that, again, as a health educator, I'm always going to say education. And so, again, just kind of educating ourselves, attending different, maybe even cultural experiences, especially maybe if we work with communities where in our community, work with populations that maybe we haven't worked with before. Maybe it's exploring that a little bit more. Maybe it's attending trainings or different webinars just to increase your knowledge on the culture, podcasts as well. And so I think as much as we can it starts with us, right? So it starts with us being a welcome and inclusive person. And I think that also, again, stems from the language that we use as well. So for example, using person first language. So we're not labeling people. For example, if a person has schizophrenia, we're not labeling them as schizophrenic. So using more of that person first language. And again, just really kind of modeling that behavior, that welcoming, kind of inclusive.
Again, I think this is different levels, right? Do we do this on a societal basis as small groups, or would we show up at people one-on-one? How we help to connect them? I'm most passionate about communities. And I'm fortunate, I live in a small community, and I can show up for people in that space and hold space for them in a way that's going to engage them. Just for fun, I go for walks in nature, and so I have created through our local community weekly nature walks. Anyone can show up, and it's a walk with the dog through the woods. And we just connect with each other, and all I ask for them to do is connect on a personal level, talk, put your devices away, connect with nature, connect with who you are. And people love showing up to that in our local community. And so it's just saying, what is that little thing I can do to create this space that social advocacy, right? That I have a voice within this community and I can show up and hold that for others. And that's really hard because we're already all really super stretched in our work life. And so I encourage you to find that in a way that you find refreshment, you find strength, and share that with others, because that will connect more folks in the community. And honestly, things like this, this allows us to create a bigger impact when all of our organizations are working toward a similar goal. This gives me hope to see so many people show up and say, wow, loneliness is impacting us. What can we do together? I hope there's an opportunity to hang out afterwards and let's all talk a little bit about what you can do with your organization, because I know we are moving in tandem. So let's just get in the same direction, using a little bit of a collective lens there. But no, I really hope that we as a community can create those small opportunities to check.
Great, thank you. This discussion reminds me of something that I learned thanks to one of my best friends who actually lives in Akron. And he's part of a group that I think 4 years ago or so, just before COVID, so 5 years ago, they started what they call community dinner. And they were kind of just a group of people who didn't have a landing place. A lot of them did not live in the area originally. They came either for work or for some other reason, so they didn't have a lot of community. And a few people got together and they said, we're just going to start having dinner together once a week. So every Wednesday night, they have dinner together. And it's grown into this huge group of people, and they rotate houses. So not everybody is hosting it all the time. So one person might only host it once every couple of months or something. And the group is so diverse. They're not all, they didn't all originate knowing each other. They're not all, at first, I have to be honest, it was a little, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I was like, is this like a church thing? Like what? I don't know what this is. But it was, their only intent is everybody is kind of like a potluck. Everybody brings something to eat, something to contribute. They sit around, they talk, and that's it. It's just creating an intentional space. And it has grown into this incredible thing that I'm so jealous of, because I live so far away from Akron. And so I have been able to make it once or twice when I've been visiting. But I think that's just an example of something that, sometimes I think in my own life and in my own journey, I kind of alluded, like loneliness is something that I deal with on a very common, it's a common experience for me and for more than half of us, statistically speaking in this room. So
can I take you back on that? Yeah, I just love, I think of growing up and where were the spaces where people just held space? For me, it was my church youth group, right? It was my scouting troop.
Right.
It was these things in person, we're showing up.
Or grandma's table at Sunday dinner, like.
Right, and now I have a men's group, we get together and we just check in and we make a point to ask, how are you? Right, and not make jokes about it, but we're actually creating that space for one another. Because I think in a lot of, like currently a lot of that's shifted toward like maybe the sports team, and then it's about your performance, and it's not necessarily that creating that emotional space as much. Why I meet with all of our coaches and I talk about how do you create an emotional space to check in with people and not just talk about their performance, because that matters and it's going to make them a better athlete. So I think these spaces exist. We just have to remember the human in those spaces.
Yeah, they do exist. And I think also what I found is that sometimes if they don't exist, there is a level of responsibility for us to recognize, okay, we're not just imprisoned by our lack of social connection. And sometimes we can be active about that and create a community. And that's what people did. They said, oh, we don't know everybody. We want to just start hosting dinner. So I think, it might be specific to my own family. I don't even know the last time I went to Sunday dinner. I don't know the last time that we had these gatherings. There are all kinds of family things that get in the way, especially if that's where you're expecting your community to come from. But we can create these spaces for ourselves too. It just has to be intentional. We have to be willing to be a little bit vulnerable about it sometimes, but it just makes me think of that. And it's a model that I really would love to replicate. Unfortunately, I live like in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and I have a hard time convincing people to come out to my house on a dirt road in the middle of the woods. So we're working on that part. Okay, so we are nearing the end of the prepared questions. If you have written any questions down on these slips of paper, please go ahead and hold those up. Someone will be around to collect it for you so that we can get to some of those. We're going to try to keep this last question brief just so we have plenty of time to get to your questions and then have some time to socialize. We are a community here. I think many of you have been coming regularly. This has provided a sense of community for me, and I think a lot of us feel the same way. So hopefully we will have plenty of time in the end to kind of just sit in that community and realize that we all have something to lend to each other in that regard. So go ahead and hold your questions up if you've got those. And for the panelists, could you give us some suggestions of, and I know we have talked about this a little bit, some of these suggestions have already come out, but specific types of places or spaces that you could go if you're looking to seek community. And are there maybe some that aren't the traditional ones that we've had in the past? Either they're not available or there are other options now, if they differ. But what are some places that people could go?
So one place that folks can go, just thinking about for folks who may be struggling again with their mental health or addiction, peer support groups can oftentimes be a really great kind of self-care strategy. And so at MHA, we currently have a couple of peer support groups. One is for those who have lost somebody to suicide. We also have a support group for those who have depression or bipolar disorder as well. And what I really love about I'm the facilitator for our survivors after suicide loss support group. And what I love so much about peer support groups is just the connection and strength that people gain from being in a room with folks who have been in something similar, especially something so specific such as suicide grief can be very lonely, and oftentimes actually people who have lost somebody to suicide are 4 times more likely to die by suicide themselves. So those peer support groups are great places. You can always go to Pathways 211 website to search for different peer support groups that are available in our community. And I think Another piece that I just wanted to touch on briefly, I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted this piece in terms of the online kind of web space. Oftentimes, and a lot of our young people are stepping to the web for connection and different things. However, there is a really unhealthy group of folks out there who have created a dangerous space on the web. It's related to sextortion and the dark web. We have adults out there who pose as young people and have the young people send them nude pictures, and then that individual will try to get money from them and actually encourage the young person to kill themselves. A lot of times when whoa, that's scary. Sometimes when young people, maybe they don't have a safe place to go to, they may turn to either these people or these places that are negative spaces. Just for example, there's a website out there, I believe it's Kiwi Farms is how they might have changed it already. But this website is where people can go to find ways to kill themselves, a community of folks who actually encourage people to kill themselves. And there's actually subscription where you can pay to watch people kill themselves live. That's out there, and it's impacting our community greatly. We have seen this amongst our youth as well as our young adults as well. So just something to really be aware of, and at MHA we're really trying to increase education and awareness for our parents and our youth about the dangers of the web. And just being aware of especially that sextortion piece and those unfortunate suicide pro websites.
Corey, could I mention something? The senior centers, like this one here,
Absolutely.
it is a wonderful place for senior citizens to, share with other people and join in exercise and presentations and different things like that. And they need to take advantage of those. I'm speaking for myself.
I'd like to say, I think the missing voice on this panel, and I really do appreciate all the input, but I think the missing voice here is our older adults. And it's certainly isolation and loneliness is incredibly detrimental to them. And it really is detrimental to their health. And there's lots of evidence to that. One of the things that not only does Lincoln County Aging offer just incredible programs in terms of just even the Smile Makers program, reaching out to people, a phone call, a text message to people we've identified that are in isolation, that's a very important piece. And of course, like a program like that should grow because older adults actually don't even have let's say the digital or online resources to just find out what are things in my area that I can go do. One of the things that's kind of interesting though is we are starting this thing, it's called the Age Friendly Initiative. And that is looking at our community, our entire county, and determining is this a livable community for all ages and stages of life? And, I think that isolation piece and outdoor space is there's so many ways we can approach that. And, that is on the forefront of what is happening, in our county. And I think you all need to be made aware of that. But, again, there is this thing called ageism where it leaves out a certain part of our population that they're sort of disenfranchised, you don't have a voice anymore, just go be quiet and enjoy your retirement. That is really not, if we are embracing all ages and stages, that includes the older adults as well. And all of these issues of suicide, isolation, detrimental health, issues detrimental to the health, that of course affects that population as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Also, the point that you bring up about phone calls and text messages, that's one of the recommendations that has come out of some of these studies is just taking 15 minutes a day to reach out to somebody, because not only, how many times do you think of oh, I haven't heard from so-and-so, but then we don't do anything about it, we don't reach out to them. So just taking that time to be intentional and call somebody. I know a lot of people are resistant to phone calls nowadays, but, take the time to do it, reach out to somebody because it benefits us just as much as.
I've seen some great studies on intergenerational work as well,
Right.
and connecting. I mean, I also sing in, there's a choir for the whole community that gets together. It's students, it's people from all different ages that we come together and we sing together, right? What a beautiful moment that we spend doing that. So I love the more that we can get that crossover across communities. I think it's very valuable. Also thinking about digital spaces, we're not going to be able to avoid digital spaces as our young people. We can make them aware of how they're using it, and get them thinking about how they can be better with it. I highly recommend it. It's through the Digital Flourishing Institute. It's called the Digital Flourishing Scale. It's free of charge to anyone who wants to do it. It only takes 7-8 minutes, and it gives you a readout of how you use digital devices and recommendations for how you can improve your digital use. Every young person I've sat down with, it's a great conversation to head into it with them, because oftentimes they say, I use it to connect with other people. And then I ask them to pull out their phone and we look at the apps and what percentage of time they use on which app. And no, they're not connecting with people. And I challenge them right then and there. If that's how you want to use it, delete that other app that's taking up your time on the phone. I'm not saying the phone's bad, but there's better ways for you to be using it according to how you want to be using it. So they're the main driver in how they want to interact and what spaces they want to create with that. So, yeah. Oh, I mean, if it's to connect, they would be calling, right?
Right. Yeah, we now have this collective cultural resistance to phone calls, which I fully understand. I don't want to call people sometimes. I'm like, I don't, it happens, but it's a change in the way that we relate to one another as a society. So we do have a few questions from the audience. Someone asked, have you noticed specific effects from COVID that are new in the population that you serve?
So in the data, we saw there was a flip in social anxiety and depression during the pandemic, but then it kind of reverted back in the same upward trends in general across everything, continued as soon as not post-pandemic, you know what I mean? But when life kind of resumed as it once was, we saw that revert back as far as social anxiety and depression. Being more depression during isolated years, and then social anxiety, and then when they were back in social environments, more social anxiety.
Oh,
Sorry.
No, go ahead, yeah.
I will say, as a new tool, accessibility to resources has increased. Basically, all of our industries switched to telehealth and virtual and everything else. So if anything, we actually have maybe more opportunities to connect with people on the social service side and to reach out to people. So I see it almost as a little bit of strength of our community. We reach out and serve a little bit better. Sure.
Someone commented, this is more of a comment than a question. They just say, thanks for mentioning person first language. The disability community is often severely impacted by loneliness. Often paid caregivers are their main source of connection. So someone just said, thank you for mentioning that. And that brings up a great point again about making sure that spaces are accessible for people, and that we're reaching out to folks. We all have folks in our lives who maybe homebound, maybe they're not able to access the same spaces that we do. So again, that kind of comes upon ourselves to make sure that we are reaching out to those people. Finally, another suggestion someone brought up for students who might not be able to participate in things like sports or clubs. A lot of times we know that there's also a cost associated with that, just outside of just the time investment that they may not have. Someone suggested volunteering as an option as well. There are all types of things that could volunteer. So I think that's a good suggestion. We do have the volunteer hub on our website as well. So if you or somebody you know is interested in volunteering, you can create a profile on there. You can also submit volunteer projects as well. So we do know, based on the data, that is a coping strategy that some people do when they feel lonely, is that they do volunteer. Certainly, it's a way to meet other people that might potentially become part of your social network. So yeah, some good suggestions. So do we have any other questions from anyone in the audience? Yeah, Bailey?
This may be maybe like your personal opinion or something, but I'm really curious about like youth and social media use and what age is appropriate for kids to be getting a phone and like using social media, or what type of education? I like the tool you mentioned, Jack, and like Shae, I don't know, like in high school or before that, like what type of education is being provided to kids on social media use and the phones, and the fact that like they can have that, but also still it doesn't replace like in-person social connection. Anything?
It's a generational social experiment right now. And it's not looking good. And so just, and I have found though, when I have these focus groups talking about digital wellness with our young people, they have a better idea of what the solutions are, and they know it's an issue. But it's like any addiction. You can know and continue to say, well, I need it. Yeah. Right. And so the more we can raise awareness of the concern and minimize as much as possible. I mean, I can't tell a parent, don't put a phone in front of the kid. That wouldn't be fair for me. I'd be a little hypocritical, right? But there are other alternatives there, and I have recognized it's an easy solution when a kid is acting up or having a hard time to put that thing in front of them, right? But we know that it's in that struggle that they're most likely to learn all the social skills necessary to flourish here. So again, I don't have a perfect answer for you other than be intentional as much as you can, and have a conversation with young people as much as you can. When they have devices, when I take them out and I tell them no phone, yeah, they get upset. But then afterwards, they always love it and then go immediately back to their phone.
So a new Newark program here in Ohio, it's actually Nationwide Children's Hospital and the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation. They developed a new curriculum called Be Present Ohio. And this is a curriculum, it is a suicide prevention program, but it also has an element where they teach about kind of technology, kind of safety. We can't actually think of the term that they use. But in addition to kind of that suicide prevention, they also talk about the safety pieces as it relates to social media and kind of those online pieces. And that's something that at MHA, we are actually going to be trained at the end of this month to be able to provide that training. It's actually a really cool online kind of program that is similar to kind of a video game kind of experience. And so we'll be piloting that with our Yes Club, and then also any of the schools that we provide the signs of suicide. We will also have that as an option as well. And I think that unfortunately, at least that I'm not aware of, I don't know, there's a whole lot of research right now. It's an experiment in terms of kind of, I think, age range of when kids should have phones and what that social media piece looks like. But I think it's something that hopefully we'll have some more programs coming down the line, and certainly something that we at MHA really want to focus on. We're certainly just seeing impacts of that from, again, kind of youth, but also with parents as well.
So this kind of made me think, I wanted to just read something quickly out of this. The title, by the way, so the report that we keep referencing by the US Surgeon General, it's called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. And you can, if you search loneliness epidemic, it's the first thing that comes up on Google. So it's very easy to find if you want to read through it yourself. But they do note the rise in use of technology, and obviously we're all aware that the rise in social media has happened. Obviously, it wasn't a thing 20 years ago, and so we know that rise is drastic. In 2005, only 5% of adults 18 and over reported using social media. In 2019, that number was roughly 80%. But what we're seeing is a drastic and very sharp increase in the amount of time that people are using social media. Teenagers were polled about the amount of time that they spend online, and the amount that said that they were on social media almost constantly has more than doubled just since 2015. So that's a pretty drastic thing. So in this report, it says several examples of harms include technology that displaces in-person engagement, monopolizes our attention, reduces the quality of our interactions, and even diminishes our self-esteem. This can lead to greater loneliness, fear of missing out, conflict, and reduced social connection. For example, frequent phone use during face-to-face interactions between parents and children and between family and friends increased distraction, reduced conversation quality, and lowered self-reported enjoyment of time spent together in person. So I'm sure we've all been there where we're talking to somebody and they're on their phone. We know that doesn't really make you feel great. In a US-based study, participants who reported using social media for more than 2 hours a day, so only 2 hours. How many of you are on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram more than 2 hours a day? I absolutely am. Those that were on for more than 2 hours a day had double the odds of reporting increased perceptions of social isolation compared to those who use social media for less than 30 minutes per day. Double. So I think, and this has kind of been echoed up here, we can't discount social media completely because it is certainly a source of connection for people. There are online communities. It is a tool that can be used. However, we have to really monitor the amount of time that we're spending there and making sure that we don't allow it to replace those in-person interactions. So that conversation just reminded me of that. So again, if you want to find this report, it's pretty easy to find online, but if you have troubles and you just want to email me, I would be happy to send it to you as well. I'll send you a link. So do we have any other questions, comments? If not, I would invite you to stick around. We still got about 20 minutes before they come and kick us out. So if you want to grab some more food, some coffee, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I would certainly encourage you to chat, talk to the people at your table, talk to the people at another table. We all know each other by now, so let's just take some time and hang out. And if I had music, I would play it, but I don't, so. All right. Again, a big thank you to our panelists. Certainly appreciate their insight and the information that they provided today. So thank you to them, and thank all of you for coming.